A certain well-known sci-fi franchise once said that space is the final frontier. I respectfully disagree, and argue that instead that honor should go to cheese. Unfortunately, while cheese may very well be the final frontier of anything worth progressing, prolonged exposure causes mild gastrointestinal distress and the marbleization of my prefrontal cortex. Which is a very long-winded way of saying that the last Noita video took 55 hours to record, so like New Horizons, episodes are going to be episodic. For all the Noita enjoyers out there, I understand the frustration, believe me. But you have to understand that there is a strict upper limit to how many hours a day I'm willing to spend sticking my wand in an active volcano, and that number is less than 9. So that bit of bookkeeping out of the way, welcome back. As you can see, the Rimworld squirrels have once again done the thing where they leap out of the recesses of my gray matter and start questing for snacks, and as an enjoyer of my current level of nut ownership, I had to fob them off with this. To keep things fresh, I've introduced a few extra pieces to the puzzle in the form of Rimworld's Royalty DLC, alongside 2 other Content Edition mods called Save Our Ship 2 and Pocket Dimensions. In their broad strokes, Royalty introduces a third Fallen Empire faction archetype with their own unique set of technology and diplomacy options, a kind of psychic ability system, and expands mechanoid raid mechanics substantially. Save Our Ship 2 adds basically a whole new game built using Rimworld as its game engine that allows for space colonization and interstellar travel, and Pocket Dimensions adds pocket dimensions. Yeah, it has some cool uses, but it's definitely a much smaller scope than the other 2 mods. Mostly I just put it in so that I can make my spaceship be a spaceship instead of being a giant box full of shelves and rice fields, which is usually how they end up turning out, but it does have other fun, overpowered things you can do with it as well. As always, I'm running the only acceptable combination of storyteller settings, namely losing is fun randy random, and I will be avoiding save scum and debug mode abuse as much as possible. Rimworld and its DLC's code is rock solid, but the last time I played it, Save Our Ship 2 was understandably very much not, and I expect it will need some hand-holding in the late game to keep the PowerPoint demons away from my frame rate. For map generation, I opt to use a slightly larger than recommended map here just because, in my experience, having Royalty, Save Our Ship, and a late game colony all doing their thing on a normal sized map tends to get a little bit cramped. This time, it's set in a lovely little boreal forest for the sake of variety, but there isn't much special going on here. Colonist selection is likewise pretty vanilla. I'm going to want to headhunt for some very particular trait combinations in the late game, but for now we just need decent people. This ends up being rather more annoying than usual due to a really terrible string of luck when it came to rolling for cooks, but we got there in the end. As before, I'm going to be naming my colonists after members of my channel, both because I think it's a fun little bonus, and as a reminder to myself that these are not expendable assets, they are people with independent thought and feelings, and I should respect their wishes, and yeah, who am I kidding? I do it because I feel bad about killing them. And if I feel bad about killing them, they stay alive longer. But regardless of the reasons, our initial 3, Ferrets, AMJ 806, who I'm almost certainly just going to call 806 from here on out, and Yuri Laska, who I will also probably just call Yuri from now on, get dumped into the middle of the wilderness in true Rimworldian fashion. I get all my configs set up, and stick them in their usual wooden beaver hutch to sleep out the first night. I finished familiarizing myself with the map as the sun dawned on the second day, and honestly this place looks pretty fantastic in terms of its base layout. I have 2 nearby steam vents for power production, though that really isn't as important as it would be for late game base game colonies, since Rimworld and Save Our Ship 2 both add better power alternatives. Even better, my anima tree, which is another royalty thing that will be more relevant here later on, is located due south of my current setup, and is close enough to be accessible, far enough from map borders to be defensible, and far enough from where I want to be building that its allergic reaction to civilization probably won't cause any problems. On a more militaristic front, I have 2 excellent defensive options in the form of 2 ginormous marshy swamp areas bordering small mountains, because when in doubt, making your enemies run through several hundred feet of thick mud is usually a good defensive strategy, and the layout of the map as a whole is quite conducive to all sorts of fun flanking and outmaneuvering options. I foresee many rat holes in my future here. Still, I can't get too far ahead of myself, and the first steps remain the same. I need farms, I need houses, I need walls. I need deforestation and building and, all the usual stuff, so I tell my pawns to get back to it, sit back, and wait. With the basics of survival established, then comes the trappings of civilization, by which I mean research benches that get to live inside the combination jail cell, potential bedroom, and now research station that I tacked onto the end of the bedroom row. The one drawback of having modded content is that now I also have to deal with modded research demands, which is actually why I went with the traditionally easy starting scenario in the first place. I prefer starting with the tribal scenario because 5 pawns in the early game is nice for fast colony growth, but tribals get a 50% debuff to any industrial and spacer research tasks, which is most of them, and that penalty really starts to hurt in the mid-game. The first research task is, of course, geothermal power. No sense messing around with it. It isn't like I'm going to bother with anything else, and I'm going to want most of my workshops and food production to live underground, so I have a whack of mining to do before I'm going to need power anyway. Food, for now, will instead be taken care of via a bit of micromanagement and a small bill size. Refrigerating food is great and all, but you don't actually need to refrigerate a partially full stack of meals as long as you keep replenishing them with fresh meals, since each meal you add will average its freshness value with the stack it's added to. With a spot of manually controlled hunting, I can then just drop an elk whenever my meat reserves are consumed, and once the rice harvest gets in, a steady supply of rice will keep me going from there. I'm also paid a visit by a pawn named Ducky, which is interesting because as far as I know, Ducky isn't on the list of names that Rimworld naturally tries to spawn pawns in with, so I'm not sure how she got added to the pool. Either way, hi Ducky, so nice to see you. Things finally start kicking off with the first DLC quest of the game. Essentially, one of the many basement-dwelling nobles has accidentally found themselves outside and needs a big strong pawn to come save them from the horrors of touching grass. In return, they will give us something called honor, which is basically faction reputation, but specific to an individual pawn rather than your settlement as a whole. This honor system allows you to climb ranks in their lower nobility, and as you progress through those ranks, host the promotion ceremonies, and meet the requirements of those ranks, you get fancy abilities and psychic powers as a kickback. You don't actually need to do this quest if you want to RP as Empire Separatists or something, but I always ally with the Empire because I like their toys, so we will accept it and offer Basement Baby here a room to hyperventilate in until their nanny shuttle shows up. Typically, I like to stack rewards for these sorts of quests on a social pawn, since one of the later perks of nobility is that it allows you to trade with special caravans specific to the Fallen Empire, but all 3 of my current colonists have the charisma of a damp bowl of linguine, so it instead goes to 806, my main combatant, on the off chance that the psychic ability they get is any good. 806 got Word of Trust, which can be very good, but is absolutely terrible right now, and that does unfortunately mean I now have to explain how psychic powers work. In short, psychic abilities are magic powers that consume one of 2 resources from your pawn: Psi-Focus and Neural Heat Capacity. Psi-Focus is, for the most part, obtained by meditating, and can occasionally be buffed incidentally by the consumption of recreational pharmaceuticals or certain other activities. Its maximum capacity is capped and is the same for every pawn. You either have none at 0% or are fully maxed out at 100%, and it will decay unless actively maintained. Neural heat capacity, on the other hand, also known as a representation of how overheated your brain is, replenishes over time, can be accelerated in its rate of replenishment by being in pain or using certain kinds of special equipment, and is wildly variable depending on the strength of your psychic abilities, namely how psychically hypersensitive you are, and the strength of the Psi-Focus implant in your brain. Psychic spells then fall under one of 2 general categories depending on their applications. Spells designed to be cast frequently or are balanced for use in combat usually have very low Psi-Focus costs, but cause a lot of neural heat buildup, probably to prevent them from being spammed, which, as you can see, is a very overpowered strategy in certain instances. Spells with a more support role will tend to have much higher Psi-Focus costs, but their heat buildup is either negligible or irrelevant, so it doesn't much matter. Word of Trust falls in this latter category. Stronger spells also require you to maintain a higher Psi-Focus percentage, but that doesn't necessarily mean they consume more of it per cast. It just makes it more time expensive for you to maintain a higher level combat Psi-caster. All of this is irrelevant for now, since Word of Trust is used to reduce prisoner resistances, and I'm a tad short on prisoners at the moment, but psionic combat tends to form the backbone of my combat squads when I play with royalty, so rest assured it won't stay that way for long. The Fallen Empire must have been very impressed with my ability to take out a single rat, because about 2 weeks later they get us on the horn with another offer. Taking out 2 rats. Twice. Of a human variety. One of the things added by royalty is an expanded quest system. No longer must you endlessly trade away several hundred utterly useless human leather cowboy hats to some frozen ice wall 5,000 miles to the north. Quest partners now, for the most part, will come to you, or feature things that you can do around your colony. Case in point, this one offers me a selection of 3 reward choices if I'm willing to take out some raiders, no caravanning required. One of these rewards is a pawn named Megami, who would be absolutely excellent if it wasn't for the unfortunate addition of the Slothful trait, which makes her terrible at basically everything useful to me right now. Of the 3 rewards, she is still the best, and I want the weapons the pirates drop, so I will take her, but she is very much going to be a battle janitor kind of pawn, rather than a core member of the colony, and against my better judgment, we will be welcoming Frosty McFrostballs, also known as Frostballs, to the colony if we survive this. We'll see about getting you an upgrade further down the line, Frosty, because I don't think your current avatar will be very long for this world. Calling what happens next a raid would be an insult to pirates everywhere, but it is a raid by a certain technical definition, which makes the sentient meat popsicles they sent to attack me raiders by association, if nothing else. The greatest threat harassing the Fallen Empire apparently consists of 3 dudes with glorified sticks, all of whom are utterly unskilled in melee combat, and one of whom who is using his stick as a peg leg, and therefore is about as mobile as a particularly zesty Caesar salad. The 4th is a special snowflake with a bio-coded, poor-quality machine pistol, which, by the numbers, is the second worst possible gun and quality combination in the game. Naturally, he also has no idea how to use it. So in short, the only threat these people pose is the potential for bad moodlets coming from having to dispose of their corpses, though they actually fail at that too, since one of them downs doesn't have any missing bits and has a good enough stat spread to recruit. Ironically, he's also better than the pawn we got as a quest reward from this whole debacle. My otherwise boring grind towards geothermal power is again interrupted by the Imperial Legion of Incompetence, this time with an emergency landing quest. One of the advantages of having your quests come to you is that the storyteller can now legitimately impart a sense of urgency to your missions. Before, quests were phrased along the lines of, "We desperately need 37 parkas or our village will freeze to death." I guess. In half a year, but we can wait, because you know your one crafter? Yeah, we know that he's a little bit overworked right now, what with all those builds for ornamental doilies you have him working on, and also the only travel-capable pawn you have has 2 wooden feet, so it's cool, we're good, we'll be fine. Anyway, this quest gives you exactly 8 hours to respond, take it or leave it. I choose to take it. Shuttle crash missions this early in the game are usually strong enough to halfway fend for themselves, and one of the rewards, a pawn called Gek, has a fantastic stat spread. As expected, 1 cataphract with a minigun is a very effective counter to 3 dudes with tactical Walmart-grade self-defense equipment, so the fight mostly consisted of frantically trying to get some free shooting XP in before the 300-pound pocket pitbull they sent as an escort dealt with the problem for me. We are a little top-heavy on colonists now, though, so after we get dank ShamWow situated, I'm gonna try and cool it with the recruiting for a bit until my tech progresses enough to, actually arm them. Conveniently, we can solve this problem by sending a couple pawns away to do slave labor for, you guessed it, the Imperial Dingbat Association, who apparently suffer mismanagement to such an extent that they need to import random laborers from the middle of podunk nowhere to solve their event catering needs. Sure. I'm low on food, thanks to the sudden influx of everybody everywhere all at once, so go have fun, Frostballs and dank ShamWow. After 1 quick addition of Pharmacist, which is a mod that I forgot to add back into the pack earlier that lets you assign different injuries, different kinds of medical care, and 1 less than quick bit of researching later, and my colony of pocket idiots finally finishes up researching geothermal power. And now the game can really start. In the middle of winter, because it took half a year to research this, because all 3 of my pawns are just that bad at research. I'm trying to run a colony with history of art majors here, folks. It's pretty tough. And then these idiots showed up. They're all melee, so I sent 806 out to remind them that this is my half-built geothermal generator and that I'm not interested in sharing. They didn't stick around too long after that. The trade caravan after that was chill, at least. They didn't really have anything I wanted, which works out great because I didn't have anything to sell them, so we parted ways, mutually assured of each other's abject poverty, and moved on with our lives. You know, after I finished sicking an angry mega sloth on them, for old time's sake. And also because I didn't feel like kiting it properly, and they had lots of guns. It's fine, I totally wasn't fishing for some zero-blame mortal injuries so that I could steal your weapons, folks, I promise. Nothing of note happens until Matt here, now called Paxer Prime, joins up, bearing the truly unfortunate backstory of Testy along with him. If you weren't keeping track, Paxer brings my colonist count up to 6 now. This is a massive amount of colonists relative to the tech that I can bring to bear when it comes to defending them, and I expect my raids are gonna start getting pretty interesting here as a result. I don't think we're to the point where I have to start culling the herd, so to speak, but well, don't be surprised if we lose some people here. And darn it all, but if Randy doesn't hear me complaining and double, triples, and quadruples down. One of the many new quests added by Royalty is a quest to build a structure, and sometimes keep it intact after you're finished building it for a period of time. They are very, very easy, especially early on in the game, and this one rewards me with a phenomenal colonist. Healthy, young, excellent traits. Aileen here has it all. Sure, she's also a gourmand, and I'm already struggling with feeding my colonists, but that definitely won't cause any problems, right? I'll just have to micro harder. Oh well, welcome to the party, Saya. I would love to say welcome to the dark side, we have cookies, but we are a little bit short on those right now. So the best I can offer you is some dubiously fresh, dubiously cooked, caribou, muffalo, or rat steaks, your choice, that have been sitting on the floor for an indeterminate period of time. As part of the incessant demands from the Fallen Empire for me to micromanage all of their various and sundry political issues, we get another downed shuttle mission, and like before, I accept it for much the same reasons. With 5 pawns on the map, I expect raids to start ramping up enough to actually pose a threat to the person we're supposed to be protecting, so I will want to be careful with how aggressively I am selecting okay, land wherever you want options in the future. But for now, the combination of 3 defending Janissaries and a bit of Glitter World medicine is too good to pass up. My medical situation is pretty solid, but all it takes to ruin that is 1 bad infection on my good doctor, and I would like to future-proof against that as much as possible. Originally, when the ship crash-landed in the middle of a trivially easy-to-defend swamp, I thought I had this event in the bag. This opinion changed promptly when the idiots they sent to defend the principal decided that instead of simply shooting the 5 unarmored melee attackers slogging their way through the swamp at the speed of a deceased postal worker towards them, they should instead run at them and punch them with their guns. I only have 3 pawns with ranged options myself, and 2 of them are terrible. The only decent chance I have is using my single bolt rifle user to engage, so instead of watching an easy raid mop itself up, I got treated to a wonderful montage of military incompetence that eventually resulted in the deaths of the people I was supposed to be protecting. This is mildly annoying, but I didn't also really care. I don't really need the medicine, and I got some free weapons out of the deal, so yeah, I can even still scrap the damaged shuttle, and the only penalty I got here was a bit of reputation ding. It's not my fault their squaddies lack the common sense Randy gave a dead doorknob. With spring comes the thaw, a resumption of my much-needed farming operations, traders, and the near completion of my first underground kitchen/storage/general-do-stuff area, whose name I would hope would be self-explanatory, but you know, we live in a society. Without the luxury of living in a frozen wasteland, base cooling will have to be accomplished manually, unless I want to risk a truly heinous case of bedbugs. But if you watch my first series, you will know that this is not terribly difficult if you're willing to bend the laws of thermodynamics over your knee and paddle them soundly, and I am, so it won't be. The only complication I anticipate here is how I'm going to avoid accidentally tanking the temperature enough to flash freeze my pawns without manually switching the cooler off, but I have some plans for that I'll touch on in a second. In the meantime, I have microelectronics and sterile tile research unlocked now, so welcome to that part of the game where we bum rush EMP grenades and hope to not get mechanoids until they're done. Randy has been nice this time around. Let's see if that holds. For those who didn't watch my first series, a brief lecture on negentropic cooling. In short, when a vent is touching an open door, the temperature differential between that door and the other end of the vent only equalizes in one direction, and for the sake of removing ambiguity, that direction is from the door through the vent. You don't get any air flowing back in. I have a room here that is only technically 1 block big, which allows my one cooler to make it very, very cold. That cold air then spreads to the neighboring open doors, which are touching the vents, but because of the heat transfer only working in one direction, I have now 5 vents pumping cold air into the mountain and no hot air from the mountain, equalizing the temperature of the door behind them. This massive and consistently maintained temperature differential lets me chill down the entire area with substantially less air conditioning than should be possible. This also works with any temperature differential, hot or cold, and while it isn't technically infinite, it does let you get the efficiency of heaters and coolers up to a truly obscene degree, and enables some really phenomenal killbox designs. The problem with using this in a domestic setting is that the design has no way of self-throttling. You can sort of control how strong the design is in a couple of ways, but there isn't really any feedback that will say, okay, I heated or cooled the base enough, it's time to turn off, because the room with the temperature differential has to be decoupled from the area you're regulating for the design to work. I don't feel like microing the thermostat to keep my pawns from freezing, so instead I will put in a second system, this time with a heater. A vent on one side lets the heater see the internal temperature of the base, and if it gets too cold, the heater will kick in and heat its differential room. Most of that heat will get dumped into the base without being duped by the door setup, but some of it will, and my hope here is that by tinkering with the strength of the heating and differential and strength of the cooling systems, I can get them dueling each other to keep the base at around negative 19 degrees centigrade. The theory here is that final implementations of these designs are going to be producing so much heat and so much cold in such a large room that if it works, it'll be kind of a thermal buffer system that resists external temperature shifts until one of the systems is overloaded, which, very unlikely. That's the theory, at least. We'll see how well that evolves down the line. As expected, my raids have started kicking up in intensity, though not so much that I'm really all that concerned for my safety just yet. Normally I don't build my colonies so big so quickly, but I gotta say, having a large pool of extremely expendable meat shields does excellent things for colony expansion, even when one of those meat shields is having a temper tantrum and punching walls while being shanked in the kidneys by a raider. I have no self-control, and our colony needs a crafter, so I grab one of the unfortunate souls down from this particular raid before they can crawl off, but mostly this was just Randy reminding me that I need to get myself picked up here pretty quick. Of course, the one problem with having a cooled mountain base is that all the cooling in the world doesn't help if the bugs spawn in during a solar flare, which is exactly what happened here. With the exception of 806, who has basically picked the colony up, put it on his back, and started running laps with it, all of my pawns are utterly terrible at combat and horribly equipped, so we take some pretty heavy injuries, to the point where I have to actually break out proper medicine to patch the leaks, otherwise people would have bled to death. But everyone made it through without any real major complications, so it's fine, we're fine. Maybe. We're not really all that fine, but we can pretend. Several more weeks of the usual level of dysfunction you would expect for a Rimworld colony being run by a mostly incompetent group of nitwits later, and the mining brigade has finally progressed enough to start construction on the first bank of bedrooms. Unlike in base game Rimworld, where they mostly serve as a repository of all of your throwaway artwork and a convenient tool for baiting sappers, bedrooms in the Royalty DLC have some additional requirements if you want to host nobility. Most of these are satisfied by doing the things that you should be doing to bedrooms anyway, so, you know, it has to have a bed in it and not be used for storing all of your spare human cadavers, but higher ranks of nobles also have specific requirements to their rooms that have to be met, which is one of the reasons why they're so much larger than normal. Interestingly enough, the rooms not being kept at sub-zero temperatures and being used to bait sappers into static defenses is not one of those requirements, so I hope they brought some good blankets. And like sleeping with their shotguns, because I'm doing both. Yes. Now things are starting to get interesting. One of the things that I like most about Royalty is how it handles mechanoid attacks. Traditional mech attacks in the base game, once you learn the tricks of the trade, mostly fall into one of three categories. A. Incredibly stupid frontal assaults. B. Utterly unfair and imbalanced frontal assaults. And C. Deeply annoying sapper raids that turn into one of the first two once you take out the termites. That is no longer the case here, and a substantial portion of mech attacks now will start with the mechs setting up some sort of fortified outpost on your map, usually with some sort of map-wide hazard or debuff that will encourage you to engage with said outpost. Depending on how late you are in the game and what the storyteller is feeling like at that particular moment, those outposts can run the gamut from world-endingly dangerous to actively helpful, and this one has landed somewhere in the middle. Climate adjusters are basically harmless, and there are very few mechs to take out here, and the static defenses are fairly minimal, so this is going to be a pretty easy version to bust open. By far the biggest threat here is the giant laser turret, so I open on it first with an EMP and then have my ranged mons start plinking it down. These turrets have a minimum range that I can hide in to not get shot at, but they also like to blow up when destroyed, so usually you're better off just using the classic lead injection strategy for dealing with them. Attacking the mechs wakes them up, obviously, and there is a Lancer concerningly close by, but I have my melee user's dogpilot and the second and third EMP grenades stun it and the remaining Scyther that comes over to check out the party. The remaining turret, a mini slugger, is pretty harmless even for unarmored pawns, but there isn't any sense in letting it shoot freely, so I EMP it as well and have my ranged users take it out when they're free. The slugger turrets are pretty harmless since their sustained DPS is terrible and they are fairly inaccurate, but they can outrange sniper rifles and are hard to hit, so most of their value comes from area denial. With all the active threats gone, I can then dismantle the rest of the nest without any problems. This one was about as easy as it is to make them, but later game sieges with more powerful structures in larger quantities can make for some very complicated tactical challenges, and I look forward to showing off some of the stronger ones down the line. Though, perhaps not this soon down the line. The one drawback of having to go out and fight the mech clusters is that you have to go out and fight them. Normally, this is fine. It starts becoming less fine when you're in the middle of a toxic blizzard. This one is sporting a couple more turrets than the last, has a single sleeping centipede, no doubt provided by Randy as a lovingly crafted middle finger towards me in particular. For context here, I don't like centipedes all that much and think their armor values are too jacked up relative to how many can spawn in any given raid, but that's a personal opinion. And it's oriented in probably one of the most inconvenient spots to siege on the map. Still, it's not all that bad. Sunblockers don't matter when you don't use solar power and can't grow plants anyway due to the toxic blizzard, and the mechs made the classic mistake of sleeping on the job again, so I have as long as I want to set up and deploy here. My eventual plan is two-pronged. I will have all my ranged units up top, out of sight of the charge turret and the centipede, and my melee units down next to the centipede but inside the charge turret's minimum firing arc. Ideally, when I lob an EMP into the top ball of turrets, I can then shoot them apart with relative impunity, and have my melee units brick up the centipede with their bodies until I can lob a second EMP in to stun the remaining bits, at which point the melee users will retreat, all burn down the turret, and we all dogpile the centipede. That, obviously, is not how it goes down, in large part due to the fact that all of my pawns are so flipping inaccurate that they would struggle to kick the side of a building if their life depended on it. Thankfully, the mechs seem equally incompetent, and the centipede in particular proves to be a non-issue because it goes down before most of the turrets do, leaving my melee users awkwardly standing around waiting for literally anyone to hit their shots. We do eventually get the job done, albeit with far more injuries than really should have been necessary. With the addition of the freshly recruited Cocoa Pop Eater, I'm even hoping that we can get some better weapons going here in a bit because this is frankly embarrassing. Incidentally, those map-wide hazards I mentioned, they don't just appear on the same tile as your colony. This one, for example, has decided to set up shop quite a ways away, and the whole area around it is going to be 10 degrees colder until I get a caravan out there to get rid of it. If I'm being honest, this is not really that big of a deal. In the short term, it's going to make growing things kind of a pain in the butt, but energy isn't really a problem on this run, and I was going to use sun lamps and heaters to get year-round crop harvesting going anyway, so it will just kind of sit there happily for the rest of the series without causing any issues. This could just as easily have been an EMP device or a psychic droner, though, and you better believe that those would have gotten a far more aggressive response. In the meantime, it's mostly just business as usual. I'm doing fine on food now, and the biome I'm in has unusually abundant wildlife, so I don't expect that to change until I can get indoor crop beds going. Anyone with even a lick of firearms proficiency is now sporting something that resembles a decent weapon, courtesy of Cocoa Pop Eater, and my bedrooms are slowly grinding their way to completion. And that, I think, is where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.